How does a perfect crime fall apart because of something so small you can barely see it? Imagine stepping into a room that should be a chaotic mess, a crime scene where every detail screams of disturbance and desperation. Instead, you find silence. The air is still, almost reverent, as if the room itself holds its breath. Nothing seems out of place. No shattered glass, no forced entry, no alarms blaring. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, carefully constructed. Investigators move through the space with practiced precision, their eyes scanning every corner, every surface, searching for the slightest clue. But there is nothing. No fingerprints smudged on a countertop, no stray hairs caught on fabric, no footprints disrupting the flawless floor. Even the digital landscape is silent. No hack systems, no triggered alerts, no digital trails to follow. The scene is untouched, pristine in its perfection. Yet, perfection in crime is a myth. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, something is off. The team has rehearsed every step down to the millisecond. Cameras have been looped flawlessly, alarms bypassed with expert precision. Every movement choreographed to slip through the shadows unnoticed. It's the kind of plan that would make even the most seasoned detective pause in awe. But as the lead investigator shines a focused beam of light over the room, her eyes catch a shimmer, a faint, distorted glimmer on the polished surface of an emergency button mounted on the wall. It's subtle, almost indistinguishable from the reflection of the overhead lights. A detail so small it could easily be dismissed as a trick of the eye or a reflection of something mundane. The room remains silent, yet tension coils tightly in the air. The team pauses, drawn to this minute anomaly. The emergency button, designed to blend into the background, now holds a secret. That tiny glimmer, barely perceptible, is a fragment of truth buried in a sea of deception. No one had considered it worth a second glance. But that reflection, captured in a moment frozen in time, holds a hidden story. In it lies a blurred shape, a subtle hint of movement, a pattern so unique it defies the otherwise perfect facade. This is where the illusion of control fractures. The moment where the meticulously planned heist, executed with surgical precision, begins to unravel. Because what they found inside, that reflection, changed everything. It was the overlooked crack in an unbreakable armor, the whisper of a mistake invisible to all but the sharpest eye. And as the investigators lean closer, the weight of that small, shimmering detail becomes clear. It is the key to exposing everything that was meant to remain hidden. Before we dive deeper, make sure you stay with me all the way through. There's more coming that will turn everything you thought you knew on its head. Sometimes, the smallest, almost invisible clues aren't just details. They're doorways to truths that no one sees until it's too late. You won't want to miss how this subtle discovery begins to pull at the threads of a plan that seemed flawless, revealing cracks that grow wider with every passing moment. Keep watching, because what's about to unfold will change the story completely, and it's in those unfolding moments that the full picture finally comes into focus. The night of the heist unfolded with a precision that could rival a symphony. Every step had been orchestrated with painstaking detail, every movement choreographed to the second. The team had spent months studying the layout, security rotations, and even the tiniest quirks of the building systems. They knew the patrol schedules down to the exact minute the guards passed certain checkpoints, and they exploited a narrow window when cameras momentarily overlapped blind spots. This wasn't luck. It was the result of meticulous planning and tireless rehearsals. As the clock struck the prearranged hour, the thieves moved like shadows, slipping through corridors with an eerie silence. Their communication was limited to subtle hand signals and synchronized breathing, avoiding any risk of electronic interception. Each member knew their role so intimately that hesitation was impossible. The locksmith disarmed the alarm systems with tools custom-made for the job, while the tech expert jammed the security feeds just long enough for the team to bypass the last electronic barriers. Not a single beep or flicker betrayed their presence. Timing was everything. The moment the vault door began to yield to their specialized equipment, the lookout reported a guard's footsteps approaching, and the team adjusted instantly, freezing like statues until the danger passed. The patience and discipline were remarkable, betraying no hint of panic or urgency. It was as if the thieves had rehearsed this dance 1,000 times, each move executed flawlessly in real time. When they finally opened the vault, the contents were swiftly packed into custom cases designed for silent transport. Even the loading process was optimized to minimize noise and avoid sudden movements. The exit route had been mapped out to avoid surveillance cameras and patrols, and the getaway vehicles waited in perfect formation, engines off, ready to disappear into the night at a moment's notice. Investigators who arrived at the scene were confronted with a baffling enigma. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no surveillance footage capturing anything beyond a few seconds of empty hallways. The alarm systems had been neutralized with surgical precision, leaving no digital trace of tampering. The team had even cleaned up their tracks meticulously, removing any fibers or debris that could link them to the crime. It was a clean slate, an immaculate crime scene that challenged every conventional investigative technique. Forensic experts were confounded. Usually, even the most careful thieves leave behind something: a stray hair, a misplaced tool, a hint of DNA. But here, there was nothing. The absence of evidence was itself evidence of a level of sophistication rarely seen. It was as if the thieves had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the ghost of their presence. The law enforcement agencies involved began to revisit every angle, every known associate, and every possible motive, but the trail was cold. The perfect execution of the heist turned into a perfect puzzle, an unsolvable mystery that gnawed at their confidence. How could a robbery of such magnitude be carried out without a single mistake? If you're already wondering how something this flawless could fail, keep watching, because the answer is buried in a detail smaller than anyone could imagine. This tiny thread, almost invisible at first glance, is about to unravel everything you thought you knew about the perfect crime. The room felt sterile, almost unnatural. The air hung heavy with the scent of disinfectant, as if someone had tried to scrub away not just dust, but the very essence of a crime. Detectives moved methodically, their eyes scanning every surface, every shadow, searching for the faintest trace of disruption. They traced their fingers along walls, tapped on glass cases, examined the patterns of light on the polished floor. Yet, everywhere they looked, there was only an eerie stillness. No fingerprints, no footprints, no fibers, no stray hairs. It was as if the scene had been scrubbed clean by a ghost. Frustration grew with every minute that passed. Detective Marlowe furrowed his brow, his gaze flickering between the empty shelves and the spotless tables. "It's like we're chasing a phantom," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. His partner, Detective Ruiz, knelt by the doorway, shining a flashlight on the floor, hoping for some imperfection to reveal itself. But the beam reflected off a surface so immaculate, it only highlighted the absence of anything defined. They called in the forensic team, expecting the latest technology to pierce through the blank canvas. Sensors scanned for heat signatures, chemical residues, and microscopic particles. Nothing. Dust layers were analyzed and found undisturbed, as if time had paused just before the event. Patterns of light, angles of reflection, even the minute vibrations in the floor, all registered normal, undisturbed. The perfect crime scene was so perfect it defied logic, defied reason. Around the room, officers exchanged looks of disbelief. How could a robbery of this scale leave no trace? No sign of forced entry, no clues about the perpetrator's path or tools. It was a puzzle with no pieces. Every hypothesis was met with silence, every assumption with a dead end. The team's confidence wavered, replaced by a gnawing doubt. If the criminals had truly vanished without a trace, how could they hope to catch them? Detective Marlowe paced, rubbing his temples. "We're missing something. We have to be." He glanced at the surveillance equipment, then back to the empty room, as if willing the walls to speak. but they remained mute. The scene was impossibly clean. It was as if the robbers had rehearsed their moves to the second, erasing every shadow of their presence. Hours slipped by, and fatigue set in. The room, once alive with activity, grew quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional murmured speculation. The investigators began to feel the weight of a case slipping through their fingers, a perfect crime that had slipped through the cracks of even their most meticulous scrutiny. Then, just when hope seemed lost, a subtle shift occurred. Detective Ruiz, still crouched near the entrance, paused. His eyes narrowed, as if catching a flicker of light that others missed. He reached out slowly, careful not to disturb the scene further. "Wait," he said, voice tinged with sudden focus. "Look at this." Others leaned in, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. What Ruiz had spotted was almost invisible, a fragment so tiny that it could easily be mistaken for a speck of dust or a trick of the light. Yet, something about it held their attention, an anomaly in the flawless expanse. The room held its breath, the impossible cleanliness broken by the faintest hint of imperfection. What was so small that it nearly escaped notice? And how could such a tiny detail unravel the mystery that had seemed so complete? The answer was there, waiting to be uncovered. Ruiz's eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer, the hum of the sterile room fading into the background. The emergency button sat innocuously on the wall, its polished metal surface gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. At first glance, it was nothing more than a standard safety fixture, perfectly maintained and unremarkable. But Ruiz wasn't looking at the button itself. He was fixated on a faint glimmer, a reflection almost imperceptible, a distortion caught within the mirror-like sheen of the metal. Reflections, he knew, were deceptive. They warped reality, bending shapes and colors into illusions that could mislead even the most trained eye. A curved surface like this emergency button was a natural distorting lens, capable of stretching and compressing whatever it mirrored. Usually, reflections were too unreliable to offer concrete evidence, but there was something about this one that defied those odds. Within the subtle shimmer, a shape emerged, a silhouette that simply shouldn't have been there. Ruiz adjusted the magnifying glass, the lens revealing a faint, warped image that rippled across the emergency button surface like a secret trapped beneath glass. It was a shadow, but not random. The outline was too defined, too deliberate. He could make out the contours of hand, fingers curled slightly, as if poised just inches away from pressing the button itself. But the hand wasn't alone. Nestled beside it was the blurry form of an object, a small, rectangular device, perhaps a phone or a remote, one that the official reports had never mentioned. The realization hit Ruiz like a jolt. This reflection was a microscopic fingerprint of a moment that no one had seen, a frozen second in time, preserved in the most unlikely place. The emergency button's polished metal, meant to be just a safety measure, had inadvertently captured a sliver of truth that the perpetrators thought they had erased. It was a tiny mistake in an otherwise flawless plan, a crack in the armor of deception. As the rest of the team gathered around, Ruiz pointed out the reflection. The room filled with a mix of skepticism and intrigue, but as the image sharpened under enhanced lighting and digital magnification, disbelief gave way to excitement. This was the kind of evidence that changed everything. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was quiet, subtle, almost invisible. They began to piece together how this reflection might have formed. The polished surface had caught a fleeting moment. The hand hovering, the device held just so, the angle perfect enough to leave a distorted but unmistakable mark. It was a silent witness, a ghostly snapshot embedded in the very fabric of the crime scene. Ruiz's mind raced. If this reflection could be decoded, it could reveal who was present at the critical moment, who had interacted with the emergency system, and perhaps even expose the hidden manipulations that had been carefully concealed. The implications were staggering. This tiny detail, overlooked by everyone else, was about to blow the case wide open. The team's initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism. This reflection, faint and fragile as it was, might be the thread that unravels the entire tapestry of lies. It was a perfect example of how even the most meticulously crafted crimes leave behind a trace. No matter how small, no matter how carefully hidden. Stick with this part, because this reflection is about to expose everything they thought they hid. The story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. What seemed like an impossible detail will become the key to unlocking the truth, shining a light into the darkest corners of the investigation. And when the reflection's secrets come fully into focus, nothing will be the same again. The forensic technicians gathered in the dimly lit lab, eyes fixed on the grainy image flickering on the monitor. The reflection captured in the security footage was faint, almost dismissed as a mere distortion at first glance. But the team knew better. Even the smallest detail, when enhanced properly, could unravel the entire mystery. The lead technician initiated the zoom function, slowly enlarging the reflection pixel by pixel. The image began to sharpen, the haze giving way to subtle outlines. Every movement was deliberate, every adjustment calculated. They adjusted the contrast, deepening the shadows and brightening the highlights, coaxing the faintest patterns from the murky grayscale. The screen pulsed softly with each tweak, revealing shapes that had been hidden in plain sight. A collective breath was held as a subtle sleeve pattern emerged, an intricate weave of fabric that caught the light in a way that suggested texture and color, faint but distinct. It wasn't just a random shadow or a trick of the light. It was a piece of clothing worn by someone who had passed within the camera's field. The sleeve's design was unusual enough to stand out, a series of sharp lines and curves that hinted at a specific brand or style. Next came the stabilization process. The original footage had been shaky, blurred by the movement of the camera and the fleeting moment it recorded. The forensic software worked to lock onto the pixels connected to the sleeve, smoothing out the jitter, reducing digital noise, and creating a steadier image. With every frame aligned, the pattern became clearer. Alongside the sleeve, a gesture was beginning to take shape. A hand half raised, fingers curled in a way that suggested tension or hesitation. The room was silent except for the soft hum of computers crunching data. The technicians exchanged glances, knowing that this was no ordinary discovery. The reflection, once indecipherable, was revealing a human element, a signature frozen in time. It wasn't a full identity, not yet. No face, no name stamped across the pixels. But it was enough to narrow down the possibilities. One technician pulled up a side-by-side comparison of previously recorded images, overlaying the enhanced reflection against known fabric patterns and hand gestures. The software analyzed color hues, stitch patterns, and even the way the light bent off the fabric surface. The gesture, too, was cross-referenced with behavioral data, how certain suspects moved, their nervous tics caught on earlier recordings. The pattern held a story, a silent clue that whispered of the person behind the sleeve, the movement behind the shadow. The team felt the weight of the moment. They had a thread to follow, a lead that could pierce through the fog of uncertainty that had clouded the investigation. Then came the final step. The technician invited the database to open, an exhaustive catalog of suspect images, clothing details, and behavioral signatures compiled over months of tireless work. The enhanced reflection would be matched against thousands of entries, each comparison scrutinized by the same meticulous algorithms that had revealed the pattern in the first place. The cursor hovered over the compare button. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The team knew that the next few minutes could change everything. This was the moment when the reflection would either remain a tantalizing mystery or become the key that unlocked the truth hidden in the shadows. And when they compared that pattern to a database, everything changed. As the digital comparison ran its course, the room held its breath, every eye fixed on the screen. The reflection caught on the glass. An almost imperceptible detail had emerged from the shadows to reveal something no one had dared to hope for. It wasn't just a random pattern or an ordinary symbol stitched onto a sleeve. It was a singular, unmistakable mark, painstakingly crafted and known to only one individual in the entire network. The pattern was so intricately unique that it was nearly impossible for anyone else to replicate, let alone possess. What made this detail extraordinary wasn't merely its rarity, but the context in which it appeared. The sleeve stitching wasn't mass-produced or part of any common uniform. Instead, it belonged to a custom garment, tailored with a distinctive emblem that combined subtle gestures and coded symbols, each representing a personal signature of the wearer. This wasn't something found in a catalog or sold in stores. It was a personal identifier, akin to a fingerprint woven into fabric. The reflection had captured this with uncanny clarity, despite the low light and the fleeting moment it was visible. What stunned the team was how unlikely it was for this detail to be present at the scene. The individual who owned this pattern was known for their meticulous discretion, always avoiding exposure. Their circle was tight-knit, and the emblem was a secret signifier, used only in intimate or high-stakes situations. The chances of another person possessing the exact same configuration were virtually zero. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct link, a thread connecting the suspect to the scene with a precision that no other evidence had achieved so far. As the database locked in on that unique pattern, it cross-referenced not only the design, but also the subtle variations in stitching technique, thread color, and wear patterns. These microscopic factors were like a signature embedded in the fabric, revealing the owner's identity with near absolute certainty. It was the kind of detail that gets overlooked in routine investigations, dismissed as trivial or incidental. But here, it was the linchpin, the one piece that cut through the noise of circumstantial evidence and pointed to a single person, someone previously considered a shadow at the periphery of suspicion. The realization sent a ripple through the team. Every false lead, every dead end, suddenly paled in comparison to this revelation. The unique sleeve detail wasn't just a clue. It was a confirmation, a silent witness that had waited patiently to be noticed. It narrowed the field from a sprawling list of potential suspects to one solitary individual, whose carefully constructed alibi now began to unravel under the weight of this indisputable proof. It was a breakthrough born from patience and precision, a reminder that in the world of perfect crimes gone wrong, it's often the smallest, most overlooked elements that ignite the entire downfall. The reflection was no longer just a shadowy image. It was a beacon illuminating the path forward. The team knew that what came next would change the trajectory of the case irrevocably. If you've been watching this far, you're about to see how one microscopic detail ignites the entire downfall. The moment when subtlety becomes certainty and the perfect disguise starts to crumble under the weight of a single, unmistakable match. The room was stifling, the air thick with tension as the lead investigator slid the tablet across the cold metal table toward the suspect. For hours, the man had maintained an unwavering composure, his voice steady and eyes sharp, dismissing every accusation with an air of practiced confidence. Now, that facade began to show cracks. "We know you were there," the investigator said quietly, not raising his voice but letting the weight of his words settle in the silence. "You deny it, but that reflection doesn't lie." The suspect's eyes flickered briefly toward the screen, where the enhanced image glowed brightly in the dim room. At first, he squinted, as if trying to convince himself the details were too blurred, too unreliable to be credible. This is just a trick of light," he said, voice tight but still holding on to defiance. "You're grasping at shadows." The investigator leaned forward. "Look closer." The high-definition enhancement revealed every detail with startling clarity. The reflection in the window pane showed not just a silhouette, but a face unmistakably his, framed by a distinctive hat he claimed to have left at home. The angle, the posture, even the faint, nervous twitch of his lip, all captured in that one crystal-clear reflection. For a moment, the suspect's eyes darted away, involuntarily betraying the storm inside. His jaw clenched tightly, hands trembling just enough to betray his effort to remain calm. The room seemed to shrink around him. "You don't have proof," he insisted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him more than any words could. "This image is manipulated," he added, desperation creeping in. "You can't trust something so easily altered." The investigator's partner, watching quietly from the corner, spoke up softly. "We verified it through multiple sources. The original footage, the enhancement process, all documented and secure. There's no room for doubt." Sweat beaded on the suspect's forehead. His mind raced, searching for an escape, a way to deflect or discredit the evidence. But the certainty in the investigator's eyes told him there was none this time. "What you don't understand," he whispered, voice cracking, "is that this doesn't prove anything about what happened inside. You're missing the real story." The lead investigator smiled coldly. "Then why don't you tell us?" "Because right now, this reflection is the only thing standing between your perfect alibi and the truth." The suspect's breath hitched, and for a split second, his carefully built walls collapsed. His hands clenched into fists on the table, knuckles white. Then, without warning, his demeanor shifted, the controlled facade shattered by panic. He shoved the tablet away abruptly, the screen darkening with a sharp tap. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood, eyes wild, scanning the room as if seeking an escape route. "You don't understand what you've found," he said, voice low and urgent. "This image, it's not just evidence. It's a message." The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. The man's change was more than just fear. It was a warning. "What do you mean?" the partner asked carefully. The suspect's gaze locked onto the investigators with a chilling intensity. "If you show anyone this, if you take this any further, the consequences won't be what you expect." A heavy silence fell. Then, just as the tension reached its zenith, the suspect did something no one saw coming. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out an object that glinted under the harsh fluorescent light. The investigators froze, their minds racing to interpret the next move. What he does next shocks even the investigators. The moment the suspect revealed the object, a small, worn key engraved with a peculiar symbol, the room shifted from tense silence to a flurry of controlled chaos. Investigators exchanged meaningful glances, realizing this was the break they had been waiting for. The key wasn't just a trinket, it was the linchpin of the entire operation. With the suspect's walls crumbling, the team wasted no time pressing him for details, each question peeling back layers of deception until the full scope of the heist began to emerge. He started by describing the timeline with reluctant clarity. The plan was meticulous, coordinated down to the minute. Weeks of surveillance had mapped out the security rotations, the blind spots in the camera feeds, and the precise windows when guards changed shifts. This key, the suspect revealed, opened a rarely used service entrance, overlooked by most, but critical for gaining undetected access to the vault. The team cross-referenced the suspect account with security logs, confirming a handful of suspicious entries matching the described times. Next came the communications network. The suspect confessed that the crew used encrypted radios on a frequency disguised as a local utility channel, enabling instant contact without raising alarms. Investigators quickly traced patterns in intercepted transmissions, which until now seemed random static. Decoding these messages revealed a complex web of coordination. Each member assigned a task, from disabling alarms to managing lookout points. The suspect's confession filled in the gaps. How a seemingly innocuous maintenance worker was in fact a key accomplice, and how a decoy vehicle was staged to mislead any witnesses. What truly unraveled the plan was the smallest detail, a reflection. Amid the suspect's nervous recounting, he inadvertently mentioned a reflection on a glass pane during the heist, captured faintly on a security camera thought to be offline. Investigators pored over the footage again, this time focusing on the overlooked angle. There was a fleeting silhouette, the outline of a getaway car, and a glimpse of a license plate that didn't match any known aliases. This tiny shard of evidence dismantled the crew's carefully constructed alibi. Piece by piece, the team reconstructed the entry routes. The suspect description aligned perfectly with GPS data from a burner phone found at a safe house. It traced a circuitous path through back alleys and underground tunnels, designed to avoid main roads and surveillance hotspots. The investigators recognized the brilliance of the plan, but also the fatal flaw, the reliance on a single point of failure, the service entrance accessed by the key. As the suspect's story unfolded, the investigators saw the domino effect. The moment he cracked was the first domino tipping over, sending the entire operation into collapse. Each revelation connected to another, timelines synchronized, and communication channels illuminated. The perfect crime was far from perfect, and every carefully laid detail was now exposed. With the full picture coming into focus, the team prepared for the final phase of the investigation, uncovering the mastermind behind the scheme and the missing loot. The suspect's cooperation hinted at deeper secrets still buried beneath layers of deceit. If you're enjoying this breakdown of how the perfect crime fell apart, make sure to stay until the end. The final revelation is worth it. The truth behind the mastermind's identity and the fate of the stolen goods will leave you stunned, redefining everything you thought you knew about this case. The investigators combed through every inch of the crime scene, their eyes sharp for any detail that could crack open the case. The criminals had clearly sweated over the plan, polishing every surface, erasing fingerprints, and even disabling security cameras with surgical precision. Yet, amid the near-flawless execution, one small but glaring oversight sat unnoticed by the perpetrators: the emergency button. While the mastermind had accounted for nearly every possible contingency, this tiny red button, tucked away subtly near the vault's control panel, remained untouched, untested, unpolished, and unconsidered. At first, it seemed insignificant, almost an afterthought. The criminals had assumed it was a relic, a useless piece of old technology that wouldn't interfere with their operation. Their confidence in the plan's precision blinded them to the fact that this small device could, and would, turn everything upside down. When the lead detective pulled the emergency button from its housing during a methodical sweep, the entire case pivoted. The button wasn't just a passive relic. It was a direct line to law enforcement, designed to transmit an immediate distress signal. What made this oversight fatal wasn't just the button itself, but the assumption that it was irrelevant. The criminals had neglected to disable or cover it, and that failure unraveled their entire operation. Moments before the heist was fully complete, a vigilant employee, sensing something was wrong, managed to hit the emergency button. The signal was sent, silently but instantly, alerting the police to the exact location of the crime in progress. This allowed officers to intercept the criminals before they could vanish with the stolen goods, catching them red-handed in the act. The emergency button was the silent alarm no one anticipated would be triggered, and it was this tiny, overlooked piece of technology that shattered their illusion of control. The brilliance of the criminals' plan was their attention to detail. But ironically, it was that very obsession that led them to dismiss the emergency button as meaningless. They had polished every surface to remove evidence, disabled modern security systems, and timed their movements with precision, yet failed to recognize the power of this old-fashioned safeguard. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the smallest elements can wield the greatest influence. As the lead detective stood before the collected team, the tension in the room was palpable. The case was nearly closed, the pieces fitting together like a puzzle, except for one final realization. The detective's voice cut through the silence, measured but firm. This isn't just about what was overlooked. It's about how the smallest detail, ignored or underestimated, can undo even the most meticulous plans. And that lesson is what will define how we approach every future case. The room held its breath, waiting for the detective to reveal the ultimate takeaway. What came next would not only close this chapter, but also challenge everything the team thought they knew about crime and consequence. The room was silent, the tension palpable as the detective's gaze settled on a tiny, almost invisible glint on the edge of the shattered mirror. It was barely noticeable, a microscopic reflection caught in the otherwise flawless surface, a fragment of light that had escaped unnoticed by every participant in the crime. That faint shimmer, so easily dismissed, became the unraveling thread in a tapestry of deceit and precision. It was a reminder that no matter how carefully a perfect crime is orchestrated, perfection itself is a fragile illusion, vulnerable to the smallest imperfection. Throughout the investigation, every lead had seemed to close in on dead ends. Every alibi appeared airtight, and every piece of evidence was meticulously planned to mislead. Yet, this one-minute detail, the faint reflection, served as an unintentional signature, an inadvertent betrayal of the criminal's presence at the scene. It was this subtle flash of light that allowed the detective to reconstruct the sequence of events with startling clarity, identifying a position and action that contradicted the suspect's story. The reflection was a silent witness, a microscopic clue that shattered the facade of a flawless plan. This case is a vivid illustration of a truth often overlooked in the world of crime. Perfection is never absolute. Even the most elaborate schemes can collapse because of something as seemingly insignificant as a forgotten fingerprint fragment, a faint sound in the background, or, in this case, a tiny reflection. The criminals had banked on the assumption that such a detail would go unnoticed, hidden in plain sight. Instead, it became the fulcrum of their undoing. It reminds us that vigilance in investigation is not just about finding the obvious, but about uncovering the subtle whispers that the crime inadvertently leaves behind. As the team absorbed this lesson, it became clear that the smallest details are often the most powerful. They hold the key to justice, tipping the scales when everything else seems lost or obscured. This understanding will guide every future case, sharpening the focus and refining the search for truth. In the end, it is not the grand gestures or bold moves that define a perfect crime. It is the tiny, overlooked mistakes that unravel them. If you want to dive deeper into stories where the most flawless plans crumble because of the tiniest errors, subscribe and stay with us. The next case may reveal an even more unbelievable unraveling, proving once again that the devil is in the details, and no crime is ever truly perfect.